Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Don't Stop Storytelling. This episode is about power, storytelling about power. And power takes so many forms, as you know. It can be the lights on, lights out, like in a superhero movie, and the villain has sucked all the lights out of the city and amassed a certain amount of power. It could be a gangster film. It could be a story about race, class, culture, status. It could be a story about abuse. But power, and it could be a historical drama or, like I said, a documentary. There's so many different ways to express and show power. But power is a phenomenal driver in any kind of a story. But the story itself can be about power on a larger level. And whether it's political power, spiritual power, and also the power that people try to amass over other human beings or animals or situations or an alien species trying to exert power over the earth. That's always fun, like one of those end of the world, what they call event, extinction level events. That's also power of nature, right? There's so many different stories about power and the dynamics of it and how we explore our quest for power, our thirst for power, or what it's like to give up power, even over when people are terminally ill and they're relinquishing power over their life, right? There's so many different ways to explore all the different dynamics and start stories thinking about the creation of power, the loss of power, the exploration of power, how power changes hands, transference. There's television shows about power, the power of money and status and fame, and what that does to create or destroy a person or their personality or the things that they value or the things that they love, like in the last episode. There's so many different ways to look at power in storytelling and to express it both in terms of technology, in terms of the film formats, and the colors and textures that are being used, and the perspective and the angles at which you're shooting. Focusing on different characters and the ways that you can light or shadow or conceal or frame them to show that one character has more power over another. As a storyteller, the psychological aspects of power are really profound because looking at, like, I remember one of my early screenplays was about serial killers. and I had interviewed a pretty famous behavior profiler at the FBI in Quantico, and also I'd done a lot of research and interviewed like all these different folks in law enforcement and everything else. And the thing that was the most interesting and was tragic and sad was that these very hurt and wounded and morbid and sick individuals, their pursuit of power, their thirst for power, and how they expressed it was pretty tragic and had profound results. But even on a psychological thriller level, or just within the psychology of any given film, there's a lot of different things about power. Whether it's a boss that's overworking that's overworking one of their employees, or it's a husband and wife and someone is narcissistic, or friends and the dynamics shift based on money or fame or popularity, even for whether it's from young children and teens all the way to someone fighting for their lives or trying to decide what that looks like at the end of their life. And let's say having Alzheimer's or battling diseases like cancer and losing power over their daily functions and what they thought their life was supposed to look like. So there's so many different ways to look at power as a theme and to express it with nuance and purpose and with power. But there's so many ways to look at it that it's one of those things, those universal themes that it just goes on for days. You can use music. There's so many different ways that you can use it thematically as well as texturally, and a number of tools within the filmmaking process that are at your disposal, even in post-production, to look at the cadence of different scenes, whether it's based on one character or the other. How much screen time do they get? How many cuts, or what does that rhythm look like for them? That is the camera following them in production longer, staying with them longer, where it's like short pieces and cuts. for other characters because they don't have as much power, right? There's so many ways artistically you can play around with that from on different layers and levels. Even in creating the storyline, crafting all the A through, B, C, and D storylines, how can you play with power and who has powers in those different types of power or power shifts within those different storylines, and how do they interplay and intermix with each other? There's so many different ways to approach it. I think it's exciting. It can be really exciting and fun. So don't stop storytelling. Keep going. Explore all these different themes. Come up with new ways. Chart it out. Map it out in whatever way and process works for you. And also know the last note that I would say is recognize your power as a filmmaker. I remember like before when I was younger, when I was a teenager, we were making films. It was like, you thought, oh, this is so cute. This is so fun. And, it was just a lot, you put it on the little screen and everything else, and you watch it on your TV or something. And, because they weren't using film yet, it's like, oh, okay, that's great. Like, ooh, the power was getting it done and like showing your friends and that sort of thing. And then going to film school, I remember the first time I saw something I shot projected, and the power of seeing like, oh my gosh, like the wins and the losses, also the negative things and things that I didn't think showed in the background, a little nuances and details, or the power of the expression on their faces amplified at that size. You're just like, wow, to draw you in with music and all the different layers working together. It's like, that's what I miss about theaters. It's like, it's great at home, but when you actually project something on a larger scale and you see it in a large theater with a larger audience, you realize the power of filmmaking and the power of larger audiences, the power of shared experiences, the power of making these big statements that resonate on celluloid over time. There's a lot of power behind that. And of course, in the filmmaking process in the past, it has been very limited because the power of who was allowed to make films versus who can make films now. Now the power rests in the creators and using your phones or whatever devices that you have that you can come together and create really interesting and dynamic stories based on your skill. You now have the power to do that. In the cameras, like, I had really great cut arms moving from broadcast cameras to film cameras and loading and carrying them and mounting and doing all this stuff. And these heavy tripods and rigs and putting all this stuff together. And now it's like you can shoot like, Super 16 on what looks like a SLR camera, right? And so you still have power, right? You still have power. So that is one of the themes that I love, other than love, is expression of power and having a voice and giving a voice, a power to voiceless people or people who may not be able to tell their own stories, or who have been overlooked, people in communities and ideas that need to be brought to the limelight or have seemed invisible. We have the power to tell stories that show those things and put them forefront, right? And make people aware of what's going on, whether it's in foreign countries, it's in wars, or different types of relationships and power structures. There's a lot of revelation that can come there. And because it's one of those sort of human dynamics that is always ongoing, I don't think there's a shortage of stories to tell about power and the balance or imbalance of that. So yeah, don't stop storytelling. Just keep going and show us how powerful you can be in your storytelling process. That's it. Take care.